Hello and welcome to another TMRN Time Monk Radio Network production. I'm Jules and today is Sunday the 12th of August 2012. Joining us today is scientist Dr. Helen Caldicott. Dr. Caldicott graduated with a medical degree from Adelaide University and has dedicated the last 38 years of her life to an international campaign to educate the public about the medical hazards of the nuclear age. Today she'll be discussing a number of important topics including Fukushima, the dangers of nuclear technology and radiation, as well as other environmental topics such as global warming and what changes must occur in human behavior to stop our current path to potential environmental destruction. Dr. Caldicott's main website is www.helencaldicott.com and is linked on our interview page at timemonkradio.com. Hello, Helen. Welcome to a roundtable discussion with Time Monk Radio.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. The Time Monk Radio administrator is Fox, and today he'll be doing the recording and technical support of the show. A couple of members of the forum were kind enough to join us for this discussion. They include Plain and Elk Meadow. Again, Helen's website is www.helencaldicott.com. This interview will be available for free at timemonkradio.com and on YouTube at the Time Monk Radio channel and at the website webwhatforum.com. Are you ready to begin, Helen?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Our first area of discussion is the dangers of radiation, and our first question comes from Elk Meadow.
Hi, Helen. I'm so pleased you could be here with us today.
That's a pleasure.
So this first question is for Lenny, and the question is, when mortality data is aggregated and correlated to radiation release events or to simply rain following a nuclear event, spikes in mortality are noticed. Yet little press coverage is given to this. Are you already seeing changes in mortality from Fukushima? And what kind of mortality changes do you expect to see?
I have seen some data about infant mortality that occurred on the west coast of the United States shortly after Fukushima. And it was published in a peer-reviewed journal, but I have to say that I'm not quite sure if there was enough radiation to induce some increase in infant mortality. I, as a pediatrician, would not correlate that with the fallout from Fukushima. That's number one. Number two, mortality data is not very good. Yeah, for infant mortality, you understand mortality data, but for other data related to radiation, very often we, physicians, are very careless when we sign death certificates, and when it says cause of death, we might say pneumonia, when in fact the underlying cause of death was cancer. So mortality and death certificates tend to be notoriously unreliable. One. Two, many cancers can be cured, or people don't necessarily die of them. So we should be looking at the incidence of cancer, not mortality data. And that's what the international organizations like the IAEA, etc., look at, which is it's fallacious. So I would not draw any conclusions from the infant mortality data that has been reported at this time.
So this question is for Green Meadow. Fallujah, Iraq was bombed with new bombs. Christopher Busby's study found enriched uranium in women's hair from the time of the bombing. Children from that time period have shown up with severe birth defects. American servicemen who were exposed also have had similarly deformed children born to their unexposed American wives. Do birth defects happen just near the time of the exposure? Can these servicemen who are no longer near Fallujah have healthy children 5 to 10 years later? Or is the damage to the reproductive DNA permanent? How will Fukushima affect reproductivity in the Northern Hemisphere?
Okay, so there are several ways that reproductive health can be impacted, but let's go back to the bombs they've used on Fallujah and Basra and Baghdad and Afghanistan and Pakistan, and the Israelis are using them too in the occupied territories. These are uranium bombs. Doesn't matter if it's enriched or not enriched. It's a combination of uranium-238 and 235, mostly uranium-238, which has a half-life of 4.5 billion years, so it's around forever. It's very heavy and dense. It's 1.7 times heavier than lead. So because momentum equals mass by velocity, if you have a high mass, you have a very high momentum. And so when you make shells out of uranium, they're better than lead shells because they go faster and they penetrate deeper. And so they're used as anti-tank shells, but they're also used as bullets and God knows what. America is really going flat out using this so-called ordnance, which is radioactive. And when a uranium shell hits a tank, it's pyrophoric, and up to 80% of it burns, ignites, forming tiny particles less than 5 microns in diameter that can be inhaled into the terminal air passages. And therefore, uranium can cause lung cancer. It's transferred from the air passages into the lymph glands where it can cause leukemia or Hodgkin's disease or lymphomas. It lodges in the bone where it can cause bone cancer or leukemia. It is excreted through the kidney because it's a heavy metal where it can cause acute nephritis or renal cancers, bladder cancers. The other thing about uranium is it is excreted in the semen. Therefore, to be excreted in the semen, it must be lodging in the testicles, I guess, or one of the glands that supplies liquid and fluid to the semen. So therefore, there are 2 ways it could be inducing birth deformities: by damaging the DNA or the chromosomes in the sperm, or it could also be crossing the placenta, I guess. I'm not sure if it can or not. But if you have a genetically chromosomally normal fetus, in the first 3 months of the intrauterine life, it develops all its organs. And therefore, if the uranium kills a cell that's going to form the left half of the brain or the right arm, then that baby will be born deformed, grossly deformed, and that's called teratogenesis. And the truth is that I think 13% of the babies being born in Fallujah now are severely deformed. Born with no brains, that's called anencephaly. Born with single eyes, that's called cyclops. Very severe neural tube defects where you get spina bifida, where the spinal cord and the vertebrae don't fuse properly, and so the baby's born with paralysis in the legs and the lower part of the body, and many, many other really severe defects. So that could be caused by 2 things: by the damage to the DNA and the chromosomes in the gene, in the sperm, or to the normally developing fetus in the mother. The women who are married to men returning from Iraq who've been exposed to this uranium ordnance complain of burning semen that burns the insides of their vaginas. Now, going to Fukushima, there will be deformities, as there are and still are occurring in Chernobyl. And the reason for this is that women conceive, they have a normal fetus, and they eat some cesium-137 in their food or some plutonium in their food or whatever, and that isotope, cesium is like potassium, and the placenta will let potassium through because that's a normal body element that we use. And so some cesium passes the placenta up the umbilical cord into the developing fetus in the first trimester, where it can kill a cell that's going to form a very important part of the body, and that, again, is teratogenesis. And there are now homes full of the most grossly deformed children around Chernobyl that we've never seen in the history of pediatrics. There's a film called Chernobyl Heart which shows all of this, and it's most devastating. That's the first thing. The second thing is, of course, these elements, plutonium, has a predilection for testicles, and quite a lot of plutonium was released during the Fukushima disaster, and if there's more explosions and the like, more plutonium will be released. and it tends to deposit next to the cells that are the precursors of the sperm, where it can obviously mutate genes in the sperm, inducing genetic disease or congenital abnormalities, not just in this generation, but those abnormalities in the genes are passed on generation to generation to generation for the rest of time virtually. And there are 2,600 genetic diseases described, like diabetes, cystic fibrosis, dwarfism, I can name many of them. And those diseases will necessarily increase over future generations, not in this immediate generation per se, but definitely in future generations. So you're looking at teratogenesis, a normal fetus being damaged by radiation to induce genetic and to produce congenital abnormalities and/or chromosomal and genetic defects induced by the sperm and the eggs being mutated by radioactive elements that have lodged in the ovary or the testicles. And so we will be awaiting to see what the incidence of severe congenital anomalies is in Fukushima and surrounding areas. But just to say that it's thought that 2.5 to 3 times more radiation escaped from Fukushima than it did escape from Chernobyl. So I think the prognosis in this area is very poor.
Wow, thank you.
Thank you, Welk Meadow. Helen, as a scientist, do you believe the IPCC, or the International Panel for Climate Change, and their conclusions on the causes of global warming, that is, it is anthropogenic or primarily human-caused? What worries do you have about global warming? And if the ocean levels rise significantly, and with the dangers you just outlined in your last answer, what worries do you have on how it will affect the many nuclear power plants at sea level on all the coasts in the world?
The IPCC data is excellent. 98% of the world scientists agree with this, and it's very carefully peer-reviewed. However, they're now saying that they didn't go far enough, and they're really, really concerned that we've almost reached the tipping point of global warming. And for instance, the Arctic is warming up, the ice is melting, but more than that, the permafrost is melting, which has been there for millions of years, frozen beneath the ground. And that permafrost contains millions of tons of CO2 and millions of tons of methane, which is 20 times more potent as a global warming gas than CO2. Now, once the permafrost melts, and it is melting now, that's a tipping point. There's no reversing. We can't go back. It's too late. And now the scientists are saying it's going to be at least 2 degrees centigrade hotter by the middle of the century and 4 degrees centigrade hotter by the end of the century, which is antithetical to human life. We're not going to survive. Our children have no future. And we are still burning coal like there's no tomorrow. Australia's exporting coal to China like there's no tomorrow. America's burning coal like there's no tomorrow. And there are many symptoms of global warming. And I won't go into them all, but the sea is becoming acidified because the CO2 is dissolving in the water, and that will dissolve the shells of the shellfish and the corals because they need an alkaline solution to make their calcium carbonate shells and the corals. But what happens is when water heats up, it expands. We all know that. So as the seas heat and the oceans heat, they will expand. And the sea level is rising now, faster than we've ever seen it before in recorded history. And there are many nuclear power plants built at sea level on the ocean. And as the sea levels rise, 2 things will happen. One is the catastrophic storms that we're now seeing will increase in frequency with hurricanes and not necessarily tidal waves caused by earthquakes, and that's got nothing to do with global warming, but catastrophic storms. So, and sea level rise, which were continuous. And so you can imagine the control rooms of these nuclear power plants being flooded, and it will be sort of similar to the Fukushima disaster, where in fact the tsunami did come in, a tidal wave. But, these power plants, built at sea level on the oceans are, totally vulnerable to climate change. That's number one. Number two, many of the reactors are built on rivers and lakes. Now, in France some years ago, there was such a heat wave that the rivers almost dried up, and also the water heated above, I think, 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which is above the level that will cool a reactor. And each reactor needs 1 million gallons a minute to keep it cool, sucked in by huge pumps. And so the water was too hot, and also there wasn't enough water. They had to close the reactors down, shut them down. So therefore, nuclear power is antithetical, or global warming is antithetical to nuclear power operations. No one really is talking about this, and it's sticking out like a sore thumb. It's just amazing.
Yes, it is a big issue, Helen. Moving on to personal responses to radiation, Elk Meadow has another question for you, Helen.
So the question is, and this is my question, if you had to name 2 or 3 therapies to try to protect against or remove radioactive isotopes, what would they be? Can you recommend some reasonable ongoing habits that we can incorporate into our daily routine in order to remove radiation from the body and also improve the body's overall ability to minimize the harmful effects of radiation?
There are none. I repeat, there are none. And this is what really gets me. We're used to, when we're sick, we'll take a pill. For instance, I'm hypertensive, so I take various drugs to get my blood pressure down to normal. There's nothing we can take to remove radiation from our body or to improve our immune systems in a healthy person are absolutely fine. You don't need to boost your immune mechanisms, A, and B, you can't. Nothing you can take to boost your immune mechanisms, even though many naturopathic people say you can, you can't. And what really got me was, I think 2 days after the Fukushima accident began, I just got this dreadful feeling in the pit of my stomach. My God, this is ongoing, and there's absolutely nothing we can do about it. Nothing we can do to help our patients. We can't decontaminate them. Well, you can give them EDTA, which is a chelating agent, which might remove some of the plutonium, not all. Won't remove the cesium, the strontium, and the... there are 200 isotopes that get out of a reactor. Some live only seconds, but some live for millions of years. You can't remove this stuff. You can't do anything about it. And the fact is it takes 5 to 70 years to develop your cancer once you have inhaled or ingested radioactive material in the food. And the radioactive elements stay in various organs, irradiating small volumes of cells for years. So those cells get a whopping dose of radiation. People don't understand internal emitters. And also, people around Fukushima got enveloped in huge clouds of deadly radioactive gases, which irradiated them externally too. So like they got sort of high doses of gamma radiation, which is like X-rays. So they were exposed to 2 things. One is external radiation, and 2 is internal emitters. And the internal emitters are probably much more dangerous than the external radiation they were exposed to in a transitory fashion. But I want to emphasize, medically, there is nothing we can do. And the medical dictum states, if you have an incurable disease like cancer, the only recourse is prevention. Nuclear power plants are cancer factories, period. Even if they operate normally for 40 years, they're always releasing radioactive elements into the air and water. They're called routine. Don't worry, just routine releases. A. B, then you've got to store the radioactive waste isolated from the ecosphere for 1 million years, according to the US EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. Any container you put it in will last no longer than 100 years, but maybe not even 50 years, because concrete cracks, steel rusts, titanium breaks, and so you can imagine future generations. The radioactive waste leaking, and America's got 70,000 tonnes of it already from the civilian nuclear power industry. God knows how much France has, let alone England. England's got a huge amount, let alone Japan, and we keep making more of it every day. And then there's a huge amount of radioactive waste from the military program, which isn't even counted in these figures. And so this waste will leak into underground water systems. It will then rise up to the surface in rivers and springs and lakes, and then it bioconcentrates by orders of magnitude at each step of the food chain, tens to hundreds of thousands of times. Algae, crustaceans, little fish, big fish, us. And as we stand at the apex of the food chain, these elements concentrate most highly in human bodies. Same with the soil. These elements land on the soil and the grass absorbs them, like strontium-90 and cesium-137 and americium-241, you name it. And then the cattle eat the grass. They're concentrated further in the milk and the meat. Then we drink the milk and we eat the meat, and a pregnant woman may be drinking the milk. So radioactive elements pass through her breast on the way to feeding the baby. So on the way, these elements will irradiate breast cells, and a regulatory gene may be damaged in a breast cell. Later on, she may develop cancer from the result of breastfeeding her baby, and the baby ingests maybe strontium-90, which lands in its bone, and when it's 5, it develops leukemia because that strontium-90 has irradiated a primitive white blood cell which has been mutated and goes on to produce cancer of the white blood cells, which is leukemia. So you can imagine generations hence, people waking up in the morning, their breast milk already radioactive, their babies already being born deformed from teratogenesis or congenital from genetic abnormalities. Children developing cancer at the age of 6 and not 60 because they're exposed in utero or very young to radioactive elements in their food and their breast milk. And that's the legacy we're leaving to future generations so we can turn our lights on or make bombs to blow ourselves up. This is a really wicked criminal industry. And as someone said to me the other day, young Germans say, but Daddy, what were you doing during the war? Did you help to transport the Jews to the gas ovens? Did you build the gas ovens? Likewise, soon people are going to be saying, but Daddy, what did you do during the nuclear age? Did you design the reactors? Were you part of the university academia at MIT or wherever supporting nuclear power? Or did you work at Los Alamos Labs designing nuclear weapons, Daddy? Why did you do that?
Correct, Helen. And also, just one point, this is a lot of people have been asking, myself and probably others, nuclear radiation, there's a lot of also problems in regards to chemical and biological in terms of H1N1 and mad cow. Can radiation change these diseases to make them super diseases? Is there a potential for that?
Well, radiation, as I've described, mutates genes, and viruses have genes, and the reason that we can't really make adequate immune serums for flu is because the flu virus keeps changing all the time and mutating. So you think you've got a tremendous immune serum that will produce antibodies for a particular flu virus, but before you know what's happened, you've got another flu virus. And that happens with all viruses. They all mutate, as do bacteria. That's why we've got so many bacteria that are now resistant to antibiotics, because as we use antibiotics, particularly we're using them to grow chickens and cows and pigs and stuff, which is just really wicked. So we're ingesting a lot of antibiotics ourselves, and the bacteria within our systems and on our skin and the like mutate to become resistant and to survive with these antibiotics. So that's why we have methicillin-resistant Staphylococcal aureus, which people catch in hospitals, and we can't cure them, we can't treat them because they're resistant to all the antibiotics that we currently have in our medical arsenal. So you need to know that radiation, viruses and bacteria mutate normally anyway to survive. It's evolution, survival of the fittest. But radiation also induces mutations which can change the organisms to become more potent. That's for sure.
Thank you, Helen. Plain has a question for you.
Yes, Helen, I have a question from McLaren. We can't easily immediately turn away from nuclear power. And
Why not?
we're already seeing,
Why not?
well...
That's not a good statement at all. That is not a good statement.
Well, it'll be tough. Let's just put it that way. I mean, I'm living in Japan, and I see the games they play.
Yeah, but we'll have millions of cancers. I mean, I'm speaking now as a physician. You don't do things that cause cancer and kill people for money or to turn on lights. That's evil. That is evil. Yeah, they say, well, we've got to have electricity, but the truth is for 2 years, Japan has functioned without nuclear power, period. They closed their 54 reactors. Yeah, so they may have to sweat a bit more in the summer. My nose bleeds for them. You know, we shouldn't have air conditioners. We shouldn't have all this electricity-generated stuff. We're so spoiled. We've got a sense of entitlement, which we should not have. Just remember that Shakespeare wrote by candlelight, so did Mozart, so did Wagner. We've lived for millions of years without electricity. So we've got a strange perspective that we are entitled to do whatever we want, and to hell with the consequences.
Well, what can I say? I live in Japan, and I'm convinced that it's a total scam, that they don't need the nuclear plants here. I'm not sure about other countries. But I do know that even saying that, just on a political front, Tokyo Electric, as an example, is really more powerful than the Japanese government. And so even if we could technically do without it, it still would be a long-term process to get the pressure across to make them do anything good. But moving along to the rest of the question here, it's a little bit broader. We have these disasters like Fukushima, Chernobyl, and we have the potential for many more such disasters and even worse disasters. So given a sliding scale of events that could occur from minor to catastrophic, what can you suggest people do to deal with issues of food and water, short of abandoning the hemisphere that's been affected?
Well, it's a tough question. I've already said that there's nothing you can do to protect yourself except that all the food in Japan should be monitored routinely to see if it's radioactive, and no one should be eating radioactive food. I mean, 63% of the fish caught 100K from Fukushima have cesium in them. They're catching tuna off the coast of California now with cesium in them. Much of the rice in Japan is grown in the Fukushima prefecture, and what are they doing when it's radioactive? They're diluting it and mixing it with non-radioactive rice.
Well, they're doing more than that. They're grinding it down, so it's harder to measure.
Grinding it down to do what?
Well, you know, if you start with rice and it's like brown rice, and then you grind it down into white, if you grind it down more, you're getting more of the radiation on the surface out. And so, in other words, they're doing...
It's not on the surface. It's taken up by the roots of the rice, and it's incorporated within the rice grain itself. It's not just on the surface of the rice, it's within the rice. And
Helen, you're preaching to the choir on this one. I'm just pointing out that they're doing everything imaginable. Yeah,
well, they're still feeding radioactive food to children in kindergartens, and I will say that children are 10 to 20 times more radiosensitive than adults. Little girls twice as sensitive as little boys. Fetuses thousands of times more so, more vulnerable to getting cancers. What's happening is criminal. I have to say that the Russians were much more proactive in removing people from, exclusion zones than have been the Japanese. And I agree with you about TEPCO, although now TEPCO has been nationalized. The government bought
that's not.
For everything.
Helen, it's the other way. It's that all their bad debts have been tossed over to the government, and then the 500 subsidiary companies they own around the world, they're kind of like a big GE/Goldman Sachs. All those assets are safe. So it's really a royal scam. But I think part of the question though was can we do something? But Helen, can we do something like wash vegetables in vinegar, or use an ozone generator with the water, or clay, or I mean, in other words, the question is: are there practical things we can do besides moving to a different hemisphere?
No, because as I explained, cesium and strontium and the other 100 radioactive elements land on the soil. They are then absorbed by the roots into the vegetables, into the rice, into the fish or whatever, and you can't, by washing it in vinegar, remove the radiation from the food. Yeah, some may, but there's not a lot getting out now from the reactors. So some may have landed on the spinach leaves, and you maybe can wash that off, but you can't get the cesium out of the spinach by washing it. You can't get anything out of the vegetables, the milk, the meat by washing it. If you filter your water, many of these elements are soluble in water. Cesium is very soluble, and it will go straight through the filter. You may be able to remove a little bit, but I mean, are you asking me, the person living in Japan, where do you live? Do you live in Tokyo? Where do you live?
I live in Tokyo.
Yeah. Well, there are parts of Tokyo that are terribly radioactive. They measured some house dust from an apartment 12 feet, 12 stories above the ground, 12 stories the other day in Tokyo, and it had a lot of cesium and strontium in it, and uranium, obviously coming from Fukushima. And the people in Japan sleep on the floor. House dust is, it's much of it's radioactive. I can't give you an answer, because how do you evacuate 35 million people? If Building 4 collapses with a cooling pool of over 100 tons of very, very radioactive spent fuel, if there's another earthquake greater than 7, they may have to evacuate Tokyo, but where does Tokyo go? I mean, this is a disaster with no obvious solutions.
Doctor, I have a quick follow-up. Follow-up. The next question is that the authorities in Japan seem to be lying and obfuscating far more than the Soviets did about Chernobyl. So how can we make a decision about something like moving when we really can't trust any information? You were quoted as saying that you would leave the Northern Hemisphere if Fuel Pool 4 collapsed. But how would you know if it had collapsed?
Oh, well, I think you'll know. I mean...
Well, I don't trust their videos at all. I think they're lying about everything. I don't trust. I think they're manipulating the videos with software and other things. I know, but you'll know if there's an earthquake greater than 7 on the seismic scale near Fukushima. You'll know that. That will be reported. I mean, I think you will know if Building 4 goes, because the Americans are watching it closely. Everyone is, because it will be a disaster. They're in bed together, Doctor. They're in bed. They're part of the problem.
Well, partly, but I wouldn't be too cynical. I think you'll know. Where do you go? Have you got children?
No.
Okay. Well, adults are less vulnerable. I mean, you're taking a gamble. How old are you?
50, give or take.
Right. Well, I mean, I've just turned 74, and if I eat radioactive food and it takes me 15 years to get my cancer, I'll be 90, so kind of it won't matter. But when you're young, you're more vulnerable. Your cells are replicating faster than old people, so therefore you're more vulnerable to getting cancer, and you will have to make your own decision. I would not live in Tokyo. Personally, I would not. I would not live in Japan. I would be very wary of eating food unless I knew exactly where it came from. If it comes from the south of Japan, I would eat it. I wouldn't eat fish because, and the seaweed, you know that the Japanese so love it. I mean, it's a tragedy beyond anything I can absolutely describe. That, the Japanese suffered those 2 ghastly weapons, nuclear genocidal weapons, and now they've suffered this, set up by the Americans, I must say.
Well, then maybe you can help me. Can you tell me, can you recommend a place to get a test? I mean, they have places for testing radiation here, but I don't trust any of them. What would you recommend?
What do you want to test? Your food or your urine? Or what?
No, the body, urine, hair, whatever.
You need to be put in a whole body counter. A whole body counter. They're around. You can Google it. Whole body counter. They are around, and that can measure the isotopes that are in your body, because it measures the spectrum of gamma radiation, and then they can say, look, that one's cesium, that one's plutonium, that one's uranium, that one's strontium, you see. You can see it. But anyway, that won't make you feel better if you've got stuff in your body, will it?
Well, I have a lot more faith in alternative medicine than you may, so I would make some attempts, and I don't know if they would work.
Okay.
But even if they don't work, I would say, forewarned is forearmed and all that. I mean, it would be nice to know, okay, well, possibly I'm looking at whatever the problem might be down the road in 5 or 10 years, and I might as well know that.
Okay, well, this is all your personal decision. But
of course.
Bottom line is that I can't suggest anything really that will make you feel better. And I come back to what I said originally. This is it's almost like it's like descending into Hades in a way. I mean, there's nothing that can be done. And the accident is not over. It's ongoing at least for the next 30 years. And then you can have more. They've got all those reactors around, at sea level.
Well, I'm glad to see some optimism from you. I was thinking it'd be a lot worse than 30 years.
Sorry, my love. I can't give you optimism. I'm sorry. I'm a doctor, and you have to tell people the truth. And I'm sorry, I can't. All I can say is that those reactors must stay shut. What they do with their radioactive waste in Japan, God only knows. I think some of them are thinking of sending it to Australia. But, I wouldn't, Australia, we don't have nuclear power plants here. They're too dangerous for us. We just export the fuel, and the fuel in those reactors was Australian uranium. We're really wicked. It's much worse than exporting heroin. Yeah, I think you have to finally get your head around what all things nuclear really means. It's antithetical to the life process. That's really what it is. And I learned that in first year medical school in 1965 when I learnt about Muller, who irradiated Drosophila fruit flies with X-rays, same stuff as the nuclear power plants produce, and it induced abnormalities like crooked wings and the like that were passed on generation to generation. I knew then what it meant, that it would produce random compulsory genetic engineering for the rest of time, not just in human species, but the 30 million other species that cohabit the planet with us. That's what it means.
And that's where we are today.
Yep.
That's where we are today.
Yep.
Well, all I can say on the level here is I think that the nuclear plants are messed up all over. I think it's not just Fukushima. I think they have some other ones they're just hiding, and then they're spreading the debris all over. And so that was my question. I don't really trust that they will tell us things, and so I actually have spent a lot of time out of the Tokyo area because of the concerns. But my real concern is food, and I would think that you would agree with that. Isn't it really the internal threat from food that's the biggest practical matter?
I have said that already, yes.
Well.
And I would refer you to my web page called nuclearfreeplanet.org, which is just full of articles relevant to what we've been talking about. I would refer you to my book, Nuclear Power is Not the Answer, where you can actually read about radiation biology and how it impacts genes and about internal emitters in food. The whole thing. I would really recommend that you read that, because then you will know. It's like me having to read Gray's Anatomy to become a physician. You must really understand the science of this to know what I'm talking about.
Okay, well, thank you, Helen. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Due to technical difficulties, we are resuming our interview with Helen. Again, Helen's website is www.helencaldicott.com. Is there anybody else on the forum that has anything to add on the topic of personal responses to radiation?
I did. I had a follow-up question. This is Elk Meadow. Hi, Helen. How are you today?
Very well, thanks, Elk.
So, you had mentioned in our earlier conversation that we must immediately turn away from nuclear power. What actions do you recommend that can bring about those changes within our control and area of influence that will actually produce meaningful results, that also don't require a charismatic leader at all, but simply many individuals who are willing to take action themselves?
Well, we all live in a democracy, both in Australia and England and Western Europe and the US and Canada. That means you are the leaders and your representatives are your followers, really. Therefore, the way forward is to totally renounce any form of electricity production using coal or oil or natural gas, because they all create global warming, and we're in very serious strife from global warming. The predictions are very, very ominous, and we must turn away from nuclear power. Now, I held a conference some years ago called Global Warming and Nuclear Power, and from that conference came a study called Carbon-Free, Nuclear-Free. You can download that at IEER.org, Carbon-Free, Nuclear-Free. By 2050, but more like 2030, the whole of the United States could be carbon-free and nuclear-free. All the renewable energies now are extraordinarily cheap, and the way to go is this. Americans waste 28% of the electricity they currently use, A. B. Nuclear power only produces 20% of the electricity, so you don't need it, period. C. Every single building in America should be covered with solar panels for both hot water and electricity production. You would then be free of the grid. D. All parking lots should be covered with solar panels. Everyone should have an electric car, which would increase the GDP and increase employment, the Volt car and the like. Plug your car in the morning, power it up, and at night plug it into your house to power up your house. Germany, which has not a lot of clear sunlight, but sun during the day filtering through the clouds, 40%, I think, of its electricity now is generated from solar. It is really obscene that California sits using nuclear energy to power itself rather than solar. There's enough wind west of the Mississippi to supply 3 times the amount of electricity America currently uses. You would have to upgrade the grid. Geothermal energy is freely available and should be used. Tidal power, wave power, there are many ways to go, and it's all really cheap. Once you've got solar panels on your roof, the power costs nothing because the sun doesn't cost anything. So therefore, why isn't it happening? It's not happening because your blasted politicians are sycophants, prostituted to the oil companies, like the Koch brothers and like Exxon and all the rest, and the nuclear companies. So therefore, you must not sit idle anymore on your couches watching television or looking at your Facebooks. You've got to get out there like they did in Wisconsin, take over your state houses, take over your Congress, and take over your politicians. You need to educate your Congress people and senators and teach them. First of all, read Carbon-Free, Nuclear-Free from IEER.org, and then get going and use your democracy. You can easily do it. This is called the Third American Revolution, which will be peaceful, sagacious, and dignified.
Well, that's a really, really long list, and all doable.
All totally doable. That's the exciting thing. I mean, you don't need to get depressed or be pessimistic. It's optimism time now. It just needs passion in one's soul and determination to achieve the right ends so that our children and grandchildren and all descendants have a future.
just kind of a non sequitur, at my children's school, they just started a Go Green Club, and there's a real passionate fourth grader, and she read somewhere that a community, probably a county, city, banned or outlawed those plastic bags, and she is passionate about that and says, I want that to be here in my little town. And so she was in the local newspaper already, and so I'll present this idea to her to see if maybe she can get the kids passionate about it, who will then in turn get the parents and the community and get more press, because they get...
Well, the parents should be doing it actually for the children, because we're the ones who've screwed up the world for our kids, and it's not fair to expect them to fix it, It's our responsibility as parents and grandparents to fix it for them. Yes, children can certainly stimulate us, as they did to stop their parents smoking when they learned about the dangers of tobacco. But really, why doesn't a school have a solar electricity? Why doesn't a school have solar hot water systems? There you go, right there.
Yeah, and it comes down from the funding. Jules, did you have a question?
Yeah, Helen. So you talk about possible a revolution or a renaissance to change, but what out of the box thinking do we need? What do you mean by that? How do we change this?
Well, look, I helped to lead the Second American Revolution. When I first came to America in '78, most people I talked to said it's better to be dead than red. And I said, what are you talking about? Yeah, we don't want to be communists. They were prepared to legitimize a nuclear war so they wouldn't be communists. And I thought, this is psychopathic thinking. So I mobilized physicians for social responsibility, 23,000 of us, and we then educated people about the dangers of nuclear war and bombs dropping on Boston and New York and Seattle. And in 5 years, I kid you not, in 5 years, 80% of Americans were opposed to the concept of nuclear war, supported the nuclear weapons freeze, which brought about the end of the Cold War when Reagan and Gorbachev worked together. So that was the most amazing revolution in thinking. We had 1 million people in Central Park in '82, the largest demonstration ever in the history of the U.S. And it was a Gandhian type revolution. It was thoughtful and sagacious and wise, and everyone was involved. Black lesbians from Harlem, Southern Baptists from Atlanta, you name it, everyone. That's what we've got to do now. And it was done purely through education and through the media. It's easy. I could, if I had the energy and the people, I could do it again. It's easy. And I was an alien and a woman to boot.
So would it be fair to say then that you would, assuming again that it would be some of the kids who can push forward through this, to, just simply say, we want solar panels in our school. We want something that produces
demand.
But
Don't
to create...
Don't beg, demand. Take over, get in your school board and organize it. Get the money. You could fundraise from your own community if you stimulated and inspired people enough. It's easy. You just have to inspire. Have your facts at your fingertips and then just get out there and do it. Your school could become a model for the whole of the United States schooling system.
Well, I'm tomorrow's school, and I am going to propose these ideas. We are definitely a leader in our community, and if there is a school here that could push forward this change, our school could do it, because we have a lot of parental involvement, and we do.
Wouldn't that be wonderful? And the children would be so proud, and then television loves children, and you could get kids on Good Morning America or whatever programs they have these days. It could be so exciting. That's the way to go.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. You just right now, you have inspired me individually. So thank you. I appreciate that, because you've given me...
Use that passion in your soul, and never take no for an answer. If the front door opens, go around the side or burrow underneath, but always get to the top. Always.
Okay.
What state are you in?
I'm in New Mexico.
There you go. Perfect. You've bathed in sun.
We are, and our school is It's a top performing school, so we achieve the measurable results that they're looking for, and for whatever reason, that gives us a voice. Not quite fair, but nonetheless, there it is.
What city are you?
We're in Santa Fe.
Oh, Santa Fe is gorgeous. But New Mexico, the nuclear state, the national sacrifice state.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of work to do there. I'll help you.
I would love to. I would love to.
Invite me to come and speak, and I'll come and speak in Santa Fe.
Okay. I'm writing all this down because
easy. Look, it's really easy. You have a vision and you go for it.
Yeah, and my particular vision is I love children, and I do lots of things with children because they are the future, and I want them to have all the opportunities that I had, if not more, and it just takes fortitude, and I have plenty of that.
I'm a pediatrician, and I just adore children, adore them, and the older I get, the more I love them, so we're both on the same track.
Fantastic.
Good.
Okay, well, and I will approach them and see what options are available. We have a fantastic progressive principal. So I'm going to see, and I will get, I know that your contact information, I think Uranus Rising has it, so I will ask her to provide it to me so that I can communicate with you and see if we can do something here. That would be fantastic.
And download Carbon Free, Nuclear Free from IEER.org immediately and read it.
And read, I have that here in my notes right now from today's discussion.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so I also have two additional questions.
Yes.
One is from Chipper Dog. His question is, are there even any jurisdictions available to file charges against corporate persons responsible for the murder and conspiracy to commit murder against humanity?
Oh, my God. Well, that's the International Court of Justice, I think, or the International Criminal Court. I don't know. You'll have to investigate that. I think the person who asked the questions should investigate that, him or herself. Certainly, the Nuremberg trials, where the Nazis were tried, established the principle that every person is morally responsible for what his or her society does. And it's interesting because the other day someone said to me, do you know the German children used to say, what did you do during the war, Daddy? Did you help to transport the Jews to the gas ovens? And shortly people are going to be saying, children, what did you do, Daddy? Did you help build nuclear power plants that can melt down and kill children and the like? What did you do, Daddy, to help develop nuclear weapons, which has happened, of course, ever since the nuclear age began in New Mexico. But I can't answer that question directly. I'm not a lawyer, and I would invite that person to investigate the situation.
Okay. And then the last question, this was a collective question from the round table. And what actions were taken after Chernobyl that were correct, and what can we learn from them? And what actions were taken after Fukushima that were wrong, and what can we learn from them?
Well, Gorbachev denied the accident for quite a number of days, but after 24 hours, the people in Pripyat, which was the town next to Chernobyl that serviced Chernobyl, were evacuated pretty fast, and quite a lot of communities were evacuated, never to return. I will say that in Fukushima, the evacuations were slow, and in truth, many, many, many children now are living in areas which near Chernobyl were evacuated. They're living in evacuation zones where the radiation is so high it's terribly, terribly dangerous. And we're expecting epidemics now of leukemia and cancer amongst the children to be happening fairly shortly, I think, in Fukushima. Not that it didn't happen around Chernobyl, and the truth is a report to the New York Academy of Sciences shows that over 1 million people have already died as a result of Chernobyl, and that was in the first 25 years. The accident at Fukushima is up to 3 times worse than Chernobyl. 3 times more radiation, it seems, has escaped than at Chernobyl. So if you multiply 1 million by 3, you get 3 million. particularly so because Japan is very densely populated compared to the area around Chernobyl and the Ukraine and Belarus. So things are extremely grim. And the Japanese government has been really criminal in its response, as has TEPCO. Japanese government is really run by TEPCO, the Tokyo Electric Power Company. It's a feudalistic society. Everyone obeys the law and the leader, and everyone bows and apologizes. But there's a huge, massive cover-up about what is happening in Fukushima at the moment. And I'm going to organize a symposium in New York on the second anniversary of Fukushima about the medical and ecological consequences of Fukushima, because we need to get this information out into the public and particularly into the media.
Okay. I have one actual follow-up question to my follow-up questions. And that was, in a recent Red Ice interview, you said that women who give birth and nurture might be the secret ingredient for the solution to our nuclear problem. Can you expand on this thought?
Yes, easily. If you look at all the societies in the world, the way women are treated is just obscene, I have to say. In the Muslim societies in particular, in Saudi Arabia, but the Catholic Church, will not let women be priests. And it's absolutely ridiculous. And the way women are treated in society in general, the so-called glass ceiling. I can't understand why we allow that to happen. We are 53% of the Earth's population. We do 2/3 of the world's work. We earn, we own less than 1% of the property. We earn very little compared to the men. We have all the babies. And we have virtually no power politically or in legally or in many other ways. Why do we allow this to happen? I mean, the older I get, the more fed up I become. And, it's time we really took over. If you look at the Earth now, it's dying. It's in the intensive care unit. From global warming, from the ever-present threat every second of every day of nuclear war between Russia and America, even though they're now best friends, and from nuclear power. And so the men have had their turn and they've screwed up, obviously. And it's time that a new system was tried. And there's a very big difference between men and women because of the physiological effect of their hormones upon the brain. Testosterone induces aggression. Estrogen and particularly oxytocin induces nurturing and caring responses. There are occasional women who can be aggressive, but on the whole, we're different. It's time we took over, but we've got to take over with a passion and an intensity that a woman has to protect her children or that a lioness has to protect her cubs. We've got to come from that perspective, that deep instinct in our souls to preserve life. If that doesn't happen, I think the Earth is doomed. I think that most life species on the planet are doomed.
Can I just ask, sorry, Meadow, just on a side note, Helen, what do you think of, I agree with you in that women have been downplayed and their nurturing aspect is very important to society. So what do you think of the movements such as like the feminism movement where they're trying to push women into the workforce, not trying to push them away from their nurturing side and getting to work, 60-hour weeks?
Yeah, well, that kind of doesn't work either, and yet in a way we need to take over society in many ways, philosophically and emotionally and powerfully from our own right. I mean, there's an awful lot of work to be done in this area. I hate the fact that women are now in the military. I think over 50% of the women now in the military get sexually abused. It's clear that would have happened anyway, because the military is all about downplaying women and pushing up the aggressive side of men in a very sexual way. Feminism is good, and I was brought up on Germaine Greer and the female eunuch and the like. But that doesn't mean to say we absolve our nurturing characteristics and who we are as women. We take that with us, but with a power that the lioness has to protect her cubs. That sort of passion ingrained in our souls. It's a very complex question you ask, and I want to write a book about it, why men kill and why women let them, and it will involve all of that. But I can't, in just a few words, elicit all of my thinking in this area. It's complex, but it must be done.
I agree, yeah, definitely a complex area, Helen. Sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. And I just wanted to throw an anecdotal observation that I have, and that is, I'm a mother of 2 young children, and my observation has been that the leaders within the school setting that they have been in, surprisingly, they're all women, all children, all girls. And they're very strong. And my daughter is one of them. They're very clear on who they are. And there is no convincing them of anything other than where their vision is. And when I look at these young girls, and they do it with grace and dignity, but fortitude, I think, wow, that right there is our future. And I volunteer in the school a lot in order to provide these young women with additional resources, guidance, whatever it is, to make certain that their needs are met, to allow them to shine as they go forward. It's just a small fraction of their schooling, but nonetheless, I'm so blessed that I get to be there and participate in their developmental process. So anyway.
That's right. Yeah, well, we're pretty smart. But I think that when we reach adolescence and the hormones start circulating, we're into reproduction. I mean, basically, all species are here to reproduce. And so you can see girls changing from that sort of sense of certainty in who they are and what they want into, painting their fingernails and doing their hair and stuff to attract, the certain genes to their eggs. And that's something that we have to accept as reality, but also in that area we tend to become subservient, I think, and that's inappropriate as well. It's a very complex issue, but the wealth of power that we have as women in society is extraordinary. For instance, there's the Greek myth called Lysistrata, the play, where the men kept fighting and killing and fighting and killing, and finally the women said, okay, no more sex till you stop killing. Guess what? They stopped killing. And one of the women that got the Nobel Prize last year, I think in Africa, I think in Liberia, did the same thing, and the men stopped killing. Then I suppose when the men stop killing, they get sex again and they'll start killing again. I don't know what the cycle is, but we've got a lot of power and we tend not to use it.
Well, just to give you
ourselves down too, which very, very much aggravates me.
To give you a little bit more comfort, we apparently have a very progressive community because we have a girls' school, an all-girls school, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, that specifically empowers these young women to be the leaders of the future. No makeup, none of that, stuff that detracts them.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
And so anyway,
I went to an all-girls school too with the most progressive headmistress who totally influenced my life. So I think that's very important, and I congratulate you on your school.
Yeah, and I just wish that, they had an equal school for my son to empower him to be the best that he could be within a particular mindset, but they don't. It's, obviously it's been the young girls who have fallen by the wayside, especially here within our community. We've got a high dropout rate and a high pregnancy rate. So, but it's one solution. And I know some young girls who graduate from there. And while I will admit, 8th graders who feel empowered to rule the world, it's not always the most delightful thing to be around them because they are very opinionated. Nonetheless, they take that with them, and as their life experience matches up with their thought pattern, I think it's going to produce some fantastic results.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, well, that was the end of my question. So thank you so much for letting me go off the beaten path and to my passions.
That's a pleasure.
Thank you, Elk Meadow. Understanding the problem is only the first step, and this next section concentrates on some of the topics already discussed a little bit earlier, but in more depth, social response to radiation. Helen, how did we get here? What kind of thinking led us to our current situation? As a scientist, having walked in these circles and acquainted with some of these people, I thought it would be interesting to find out your perspective. Is it because lack of foresight, bad planning, or greed causing mental illness as Nero watches Rome burn? Or is it some sort of hidden nefarious agenda as we hear about? What thinking has to change to get us out of this mess?
Well, it began with pure science and the fascination. It actually began with Madame Curie, who discovered an isolated radium. She died of leukemia. Her bones were so packed with uranium, she was extremely radioactive herself. And her daughter died of leukemia too. And then that progressed on through Lisa Meitner's discoveries and then into Einstein's discovery of E equals mc squared. And they became aware that if they split the atom, you'd get enormous, enormous power, like the sort of energy released in the sun. And it was a fascination with science and discovery, like climbing Everest. But then they realized when Germany was fighting the rest of the world that, in fact, German scientists, and many of the scientists working in the Manhattan Project came from Germany, Jewish immigrants and escapees, that the Germans were working on developing an atomic bomb. And so, therefore, America was impelled to do the same. And so they set up the Manhattan Project at Los Alamos in New Mexico. And the pursuit of the atomic bomb was extremely exciting for most of them, was highly secret. It was to be used against Germany, but Germany was defeated before the bomb was used. Nevertheless, they kept making it, and they decided to use it on Japan, even though Japan was negotiating a peace treaty with America through Russia, because Russia was America's ally at the time. And there was no reason to use those bombs. But they were used on human populations as an experiment. And the Japanese were guinea pigs, nuclear guinea pigs. And I could go into all of that, but it's really obscene. And then there was a move by Baruch at the United Nations after the war ended with nuclear genocide to internationalize the secret of nuclear weapons, and then they could control them. But America refused. She wanted to be the superior one. She thought that no one would get the secret, and within a few years, of course, Russia had it. So the nuclear arms race began. And America, in its wisdom, and I'm being very sarcastic now, built 77,000 hydrogen bombs during the Cold War, when 1,000 exploding on 100 cities would induce nuclear winter and the end of life on Earth. So she built 77,000 times more bombs than she needed. 77 times more than she needed to destroy life on the planet. It was a nuclear addiction, a nuclear madness, if you will.
Why is that, Helen?
Why?
Why do you think?
Because I think it's, there are several things. The corporations got involved, and that's what Eisenhower warned against, the military-industrial complex. There was a lot of money in it, a lot of free money coming from the government, and the biggest socialized industry in America is the military-industrial complex. It's really a communist system, let's be frank, all paid for by tax dollars. So there was money and a greed. You mentioned greed? Greed. Two, the nuclear scientists, a sort of persona that no one will question. They're the nuclear priesthood. They control the power of the universe. They walk into Congress with a red carpet laid in front of them with hats like Merlin on their heads, nuclear wizards, if you will, and they get whatever they want because they control such power. So it's power. It's testosterone. And it's greed and it's power. And it's also territorial imperative. America's got this crazy notion that she's the most important country in the world, the best, the freest, and all that rubbish, which she's not. And therefore, she must maintain her control over 190 nations in the world. And she does it by intimidating everyone by saying, if you do thus and thus, we'll drop a nuclear weapon on you. That's always the implied threat. She hasn't done it, but she could. Nixon threatened to do it on Vietnam and the like. So it's a very complex history of human disparity and human madness, if you will, mostly run by males, almost all run by males, but with females acceding to this male nuclear madness.
Yeah, the reason why I say that, Helen, is that you came up with some good solutions previously in a previous topic, but if I'm trying to find the underlying cause, because if we build a new world, something happens, for example, I mean, could we find ourselves in the same situation if we don't rectify the underlying problem? So I guess one of the solutions you specified was getting females involved more because of their perspective in life. But yeah, so I just wanted to try to get to the root of the cause.
Well, I think it's male thinking. I think it's the effect of testosterone, the toxicity of testosterone on the male reptilian midbrain often. The other thing to note is that 1 in 25 people are sociopaths. In other words, they're clever, intelligent, erudite, charming, witty, but they have no moral conscience. And they're the ones that tend to rise to the top like cream, like Cheney and Rumsfeld and Wolfowitz. You can mention quite a few of them, and they get tremendous power. And the women sit back and let it happen. Now, the magic number is 30%. Below 30% of female representation, the women tend to vote to please the men. But above 30%, they've got a certain reinforcement situation where they will say, no, we're not voting for missiles today, we're voting for milk for children. So you've got to get a large proportion of a certain situation composed of women to produce a result. And it means really getting the women mobilised. It really does. Now, I saw this happen during the Cold War, where women really got mobilised, and the previous questioner, talked about women. Almost all revolutions, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, etc., have been led by women, instigated by women, and then men take over. So we're incredibly important, yet we put ourselves down. And instead of stepping up to the plate, so to speak, using baseball terminology, we tend to step back from the plate and let the men take over. And things are so grim now, but I don't think people realise how grim they are, that we're not going to survive unless this happens. We simply are not. The temperature is going to be 2 degrees centigrade hotter by the middle of the century and 4 degrees centigrade hotter, if not more, by the end of the century, which is antithetical to human life and many other species. So unless we do this, we're doomed.
For sure. And then a follow-up to that then is people seem to make changes in response to crises versus proactively changing before the crises. What changes do you see with Chernobyl and now with Fukushima? What changes do you see with Chernobyl and now with Fukushima? Have we had enough crises to create change? The people that are not ignorant.
I think in a long-term perspective we have. I said after Fukushima that's the end of nuclear power. And I think it will be. Australia sells uranium to the rest of the world. We don't have nuclear power. It's too dangerous for us. We just sell a fuel, which is wicked. But uranium sales have gone down noticeably. Many countries have decided to phase out nuclear power. More will. The only problem is that it takes a long time to get cancer after you've been irradiated. And that's called the latent period of carcinogenesis. Radiation is a silent, cryptogenic killer. And so we won't see the results of Fukushima for quite a while, and the results from Chernobyl have been covered up. But I think that the ramifications will be profound, but what we really need, and I can't say this with equanimity being a physician, but we need a good meltdown in America. That will end the whole nuclear situation. That will end it. I think that will happen. I don't know when, and it's not if, but when.
I mean, you can see the change already. Plain could probably allude to this more, but with the anger and the angst in the Japanese population. But in Australia, to be frank, and in the US, I mean, I don't think many people are talking about it. They're still ignorant. They still watch their Australian Idol, American Idol, and watch their rugby league, rugby union.
Yes, well, that's because the media is covering it up. That's why I'm holding this symposium in New York on March the 11th and 12th on the medical and ecological consequences of Fukushima, specifically for the media, to teach them, to educate them and to shock them into reality so that they will report in a responsible fashion. The truth is that radiobiology is very complex. Well, it's not complex to us as doctors. We understand it implicitly. But most people do not understand mutations and the latent period of carcinogenesis and how cancer is caused and how genes in the eggs and sperm are mutated by radiation and induce deformities and abnormalities and genetic disease down all future generations. Although we're starting to see this in the abnormalities in the butterflies now being caught around Fukushima because of radiation. And so therefore it's imperative that we educate the media and we educate the politicians about what is happening and the general public so that they understand.
Okay, just one more follow-up, actually. With regards to Fukushima, I just a technical question. I heard on your August 2 interview with Arnie Gunderson that he stated that Fukushima spent fuel had about approximately a week of power before it would melt down. So if the power grid went down, most spent fuel reactors would have 1 week of power before things would get serious. Is that the same all over the world, do you think, with all the other nuclear reactors?
I don't understand what you just said, but if the grid goes down due to sunspots or to hurricanes or to whatever, you lose the grid, then all reactors have emergency diesel generators within them. Sometimes they don't work according to plan, and they've got only minutes before the thing starts to melt down. It doesn't take long if it loses power supply to man the pumps to get the 1 million gallons of water into the reactor per minute, 1 million gallons of water per minute to keep it cool. If you lose the power of those pumps, then you lose the reactor and it melts down. So if you lose your external supply, the diesel generators must work. And the reason that there was a meltdown at Fukushima, or 3 meltdowns, was that the tsunami drowned the diesel generators. So you are dependent upon the diesel generators, which are sometimes not tested frequently enough and sometimes do not work. So the situation could be grim.
So for people living near the nuclear reactor, if the power went down, you would say, 1 week before, you should just get ready to get out?
No. If the power goes down, you assume the diesel generators are going to start working, and the diesel generators have enough oil in them, I think, to last for 8 hours. Then they have to be recharged with oil. And so you assume that the diesel generators will keep going till the power is reconnected. It takes, if you lose the power from external sources and the diesel generators, like happened at Fukushima, the meltdown starts to occur within an hour.
Okay, thank you very much. Kate, Ogmedo, you had a question?
Yes. So you had said that there's a considerable latency time before the cancer shows up. Do you see any solutions that could remedy, the health concerns on the horizon that are worth considering and looking into and researching? Is there anything out there?
No. You see, we think in modern society, if you have a cold, if you have a headache, if you have this or that, there's a pill. And modern medicine is fantastic. We can fix a lot of things. But this is unfixable. There is nothing you can do to extract radioactive elements from your organs, your thyroid, your liver, your heart, your bones, your brain. Nothing. Those internal emitters stay and they get into your body through the food, and you can't taste, smell, or see them, or by inhaling them in contaminated air. They stay in your body for months, if not years, producing high doses to a small volume of cells. You can't, change a cell that has developed a mutation in the regulatory gene so that years later it starts to divide in an unregulated way, producing trillions of cells, which is a cancer. You can't change that. You can't get the radioactive elements out of your body and stop the radiation continually occurring. You can't tell if you're eating radioactive food or not, or inhaling radioactive air. And the food in Europe, 40% is radioactive now and will continue to be for hundreds or thousands of years. So a nuclear accident never ends externally in the environment, nor does it end inside the body, and there is nothing that we can do to stop those cancers developing, nor get the radioactive elements out of your body. And people think there is, and they go into Whole Foods and they go into this and that. That's the tragedy. And when I realized what was happening in Fukushima 2 days after the accident began, I suddenly got this dread feeling in the pit of my stomach. My God, this is ongoing, this is irreversible, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. Nothing. You must understand that in the depths of your souls, and don't think you can run around getting something that will fix things, because there is nothing. And in medicine, the dictum states, if you have an incurable disease, the only recourse is prevention, right? All those reactors must be closed, like tomorrow. 104 in America, tomorrow. And then you've got the problem of 70,000 tons of radioactive waste with nowhere to put it, which will leak and inseminate food supplies for the rest of time. So you can imagine our descendants waking up in the morning, the breast milk already radioactive, the babies being born deformed, already impacted by radiation in the uterus, and by children getting cancer at the age of 6 instead of 60 because they're exposed so early in life to radioactive elements in the breast milk, in the uterus, and in their food. That is the legacy we leave right now to turn on our lights and our computers. Yeah.
It's a little overwhelming, I have to say.
Well, it's overwhelming, but you know what? Human beings can stand the truth. Think of what happened with those people in the Second World War going to the concentration camps. I know, because I have to give patients nasty diagnoses, and they go into the stages of grief, shock and disbelief, depression, anger, and then finally, if they have time before they die, acceptance. But you have to face reality. You can't hide anymore. This is reality.
Well, and this leads perfectly into the question posed by Uranus Rising, and that is, a sense of disempowerment seems to be the biggest challenge at the moment. People feel overwhelmed, and when they try to make changes, that is derailed or dissolved. Do you have any suggestions?
Well, they're not angry enough, and anger is a very, very useful emotion. And Americans don't like to admit they get angry, except they go into a picture theatre and shoot everyone. You know, everyone has to have a gun, which is just really obscene. Anger, when focused in a white-hot laser beam, can be incredibly powerful. I'm angry and have been ever since, I guess, I read about nuclear war when I was about 17. Or when I learnt about genetics and radiation when I was 17 in first-year medical school. I took the Hippocratic Oath to save lives, and I'm angry that people are killing other people by war and by all this nuclear stuff. But my anger's focused in a very, I think, intelligent and wise way on areas that I know I can fix. And it gives you tremendous power. And you will not take no for an answer. You will not allow a door to close in front of you. If you need to get to see the president, you will get to see the president. I mean, it's that sense of indignation and determination and passion to save the lives of the children that will get you there. And to lie back and say, I'm overwhelmed, I'm depressed, I feel disempowered, that's stupid. How can you feel disempowered in a democracy? The forces of evil run your country at the moment, but that doesn't mean to say you can't take over. The power of good must be more powerful than the power of evil, surely. and that's you.
Yeah, I can speak for myself personally. When a number of years ago, I wrote letters, made phone calls, and so forth, and was completely disillusioned. I was one of many. I was one of 95%. And yet the action that was taken was contrary to the will of the public. And at that point, I realized I did not have a voice. And
What were you on about?
The particular was the $700 billion bailout, or a $700 million bailout. Anyway, it ended up being 787 million or billion. I don't remember the numbers right now, even though obviously the number makes a difference. But the point being that
the banks, was it?
Yes, it was the banks, and I was outraged by the action taken, because I realized that it was going to fall on the collective shoulders, and I just did not think that was the solution to the problem. But what I saw in Congress here was failure to listen to the will of the people and doing the will of somebody else, but it certainly wasn't the will of the people. And at that point, my own response was, I've tried this approach. It did not work, and I need to be empowered individually. I am no longer going to put my hope in somebody else to take action on my behalf. I'm just going to do it myself, and I can't be derailed, and I am in control. So if I don't meet my objective, I have only myself to blame, not somebody else where I just feel like they didn't hear me. So that's my particular approach. And, it's been working much better for me than the approach I had prior, which was a belief that the politicians would hear the collective people, at least at this particular point.
Politicians are only there because you elect them. And if I've led 3 revolutions in my life. If you read my book, A Desperate Passion, you'll see that it's possible. When I led the movement for the nuclear weapons freeze, we had 80% of people on board. I'd go to Congress, and Tip O'Neill, who was the chair of the House, would come off the House floor and talk to me and say, "What can I do for you, Doctor?" Because he knew that I had the electorate behind me. So you can be very powerful, and you can tell those politicians, go and see them. You need to make friends with your politicians, your representatives, your senators, your congressmen. If you don't do that, you're not being representative, and you're not using your democracy, and you educate them. Take doctors in white coats. Go and educate them about these medical effects of nuclear power, for instance. And when they're educated, they'll probably change, but they are obliged to listen to you, absolutely obliged. Wear your best dress and your pearls and your high-heeled shoes, and look the part. Look conservative, because this is the ultimate conservative issue, to conserve life. So we're all conservatives. And you just try various mechanisms to get to the point that you have to get to. But I guess I would advise you to read A Desperate Passion. It might give you some ideas, and I'll help you.
Yeah, well, and I'll be honest, the reason why I haven't taken any action since then is because hasn't been anything specifically that I've been passionate about where I felt compelled to move forward. I've been going down my own path, learning lots of new things, and trying to change the world from a different approach. But nonetheless, if there is something that I feel like I can actually make a difference and I'm really passionate about, I would be the first to jump in there, because...
Excellent. You're a good person. Yeah. Good.
Okay, well, I think that is the end of my questions for the moment. So I believe Plain now has some questions for you as well. And thank you. Thank you.
Helen, this is Plain. So I live in Japan, and I'm wondering if there are any things that you'd like to see the Japanese people do or try to do.
Oh, dear.
Now, I'm not saying institutions, because we know they're corrupt and useless and all
terrible.
that.
I don't know what I can advise you. I mean, you need to know whether the food you're eating is radioactive or not, and that means instigating a big program by the federal government to test all the food. And I don't just mean with Geiger counters. They need to know what isotopes are in the food. And radioactive food should be banned. At the moment, they're diluting radioactive rice with non-radioactive rice, which just doesn't work biologically at all. you need to know which areas you're living in. Is the house dust in the Tokyo apartment radioactive or not? And if it is, I'd leave Tokyo. You need to know what areas in Fukushima Prefecture are radioactive, and most are. What needs to happen, I think, is that there needs to be a systematic approach to this situation and people removed from radioactive areas and evacuated. I don't know to where, and they must not eat radioactive food. So from a medical perspective, that's what I would say. Also, that all people who've been living in radioactive areas and still are must be monitored very closely to see if they develop disease. But, when they do get their leukemias or cancers, there's probably not much we can do to treat them. Maybe there's there are some things we can do, but, things are grim. Really, really grim.
I'm afraid you're right on that.
Where do you live in Japan? Do you live in Tokyo?
Oh, I live in Tokyo. Mm-hmm.
Well,
yes,
I've got quite a few pieces of data from people who are testing soil and moss and cedar blossoms and dust from apartments on 10th floors in Tokyo, and geez, they contain a fair bit of radio stuff from Fukushima. I'd be nervous.
Oh.
How old are you?
50.
Do you have children?
No.
Mm. Well, the children are about 20 times more sensitive and vulnerable to getting cancer than adults from radiation. Do you have a wife?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, women are pretty sensitive to radiation too. They're twice as sensitive as men. Are you American?
Yes.
I think I'd leave and go home. I wouldn't stay there.
Well, I've been thinking about the Southern Hemisphere, but there's that. But then there's on the personal level, but then there's also, are there, for example, groups in the U.S. or Australia or somewhere that you think are good examples to follow? Japanese can be good at copying and improving upon other examples they see.
Well, I can't think of any examples, for instance, to remember.
Well, like radiation in food or things like that.
Well, what about it?
Are there any groups that you've seen, NGOs or environmental groups or whatever, that you think have done a good job?
In what way? What, testing the food?
Yeah, testing, what things to test for, or, after all, the fallout is coming over North America a lot, right?
Yeah.
Very heavily,
well,
it looks like in what I'm seeing.
The EPA stopped testing the food now in North America, and they're not testing the fish, although one university did test the tuna and found cesium from Fukushima in the tuna caught off the coast of California.
Well, for example, I know of a small group. Sorry.
I would look at the situation I'm in and I would leave. I would not live in Tokyo. I'm 74, so the chances that I'm going to get cancer from eating radioactive food while I'm still alive are remote, because it might take 20 years for my cancer to develop, you see, and I'd be 94, and it probably wouldn't matter by then. But no, I wouldn't live in Tokyo, no way.
Well, I spend a lot of time out, and I'm gradually trying to move. It hopefully won't be more than a few more months.
Right.
But I just think that the Japanese people are angry and want to do things, but going from that to actually getting anything done in the real world is quite hard. And the righteous outrage that I guess we sense in some of your comments, and it's here. It's on the streets. It's real,
the
but
women in particular are angry.
Yeah, particularly the women with children, and also just as an outrage about the response about the total indifference to tsunami victims.
Absolutely obscene. Yep.
So there is that real sense of outrage. The problem is, it's just where you go with it. They just manipulate people, and then you go around in circles. And anyway, they're very good at handling and then pushing people off in corners and things. And so
Yep.
I think the thing like testing food is what's needed. But, there's a big supermarket chain that started testing, and they were threatened very seriously. If you continue testing, we consider that essentially creating panic, and creating panic is a crime.
That's right. Yeah, mustn't create panic.
So how's that for outrageous?
Don't tell people the truth. Terrible. It's terrible.
So it's pretty rough. But anyway, on a personal level, there's that. But I'm truly telling you that there are people testing food in the States or Canada and getting very bad numbers. And they're just doing it as a labor of love. And I think there's only one place left still that will take food samples. There's pressure there, too. So I'm not totally, let's say I'm from Seattle, but if I move back to Seattle, I'm not too happy about it. I was in Vancouver not long ago, and both my wife and I felt like we're having serious, heart pains or something, which occasionally happens over here. And we'd never had it before Fukushima. So that's unscientific, but I bet there's a lot of stuff going over there. Yeah.
All right. Well, I wish you luck.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Plain. Helen, as a final question before we end, is there anything that we have neglected to ask that you would like to mention?
Oh my God! These topics are huge. I suppose I would like to end by advising people to read my book, Nuclear Power is Not the Answer. You will find lots of your questions answered if you read that book. It's written for the lay public from a medical perspective, and you'll understand and learn a lot by reading that. You can go to my webpage, nuclearfreeplanet.org, where there is a multitude of articles on all subjects nuclear that you can read and learn from. My personal webpage, helencaldicott.com. And then I have a radio program that's now 4 years old, a weekly program where I interview the top scientists in the world on all aspects of nuclear, global warming and the like for an hour. And it's unedited. And so if you go to ifyoulovethisplanet.org, you can download the various shows that you would really want to listen to, particularly about Fukushima and Chernobyl and the like. And you can also get that played on your local radio station, your community station, NPR, whatever. So that's how I would end. And I would refer back to President Jefferson, who said, an informed democracy will behave in a responsible fashion. Inform yourselves and then act.
We've been speaking with Dr. Helen Caldicott. Her website is helencaldicott.com. The Greek philosopher Plato wrote, "Human behavior flows from three main sources: desire, emotion, and knowledge. Helen is one such source, providing the knowledge we need as humans to make informed decisions from a media that does its best to keep us uninformed. It is up to all of us to provide the necessary desire and emotion to cause change, because, as certain as life and death, if we don't attempt to make the change we desire, others will make it for us." On behalf of Fox and all the members of the Time Monk Radio Forum, thank you, Helen. In the tradition of pie-loving Time Monk Radio, may you and your family have many pies to come.
Thank you very much. That's lovely. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen.
Thank you.
Thanks.